Up, Marcus? How are you? Good morning, YouTube. Hello, everybody. Sorry we're a couple minutes late, but yeah, I'm joined today by Tim Canova. Welcome to Get Your News On with Ron, the world's first viewer-curated streaming news show. I know that. Well, here's the deal: the wall, Joe. The wall is now it's now a white wall as opposed to a purple wall. That's the big difference. But yeah, I'm still building. I just moved into my new place. I know a lot of you guys know that. But yeah, that's just how we're gonna roll here. I'm going to monitor the chats by myself. So I am monitoring the chats here because Pasta's not here today. But we have a guest, and my guest today is Tim Canova. Tim, how's it going?
Going well. Thanks, Ron. I'm sorry that I'm missing Pasta.
Right. Yeah.
Pasta was part of my campaign in 2016.
Right. I know. Well, he was bummed out.
What's that?
He was bummed out when he found out you were today's guest. He was really bummed out he couldn't be there. He's training at a new job because I can't afford to pay him a salary yet. Someday. We're going to get there someday.
Well, you'll have to have me back. You'll have to have me back sometime when Pasta's here.
Absolutely.
The last campaign, he was walking door to door, knocking on doors for us in the August heat. He was a great field organizer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and he books the guests for this show, and he helps out. He helps moderate the chat, and he supervises the YouTube chat and stuff like that. So yeah, he's a good dude. So here's the way it's going to work, Tim. So first of all, for anybody that doesn't know who Tim Canova is, I'm going to hand it over to him to introduce himself, but a quick skinny. And I know a lot of you guys already know who Tim is, and you're real excited to ask him some questions. And this was a last-minute surprise guest, which is awesome. So Tim is running in Florida's 23rd. He's a progressive who's trying to take out Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Maybe among the most sinister of all the corporate Democrats. She's involved in payday loans. She's the worst of the worst in many ways. Tim's running against her. In 2016, he dealt with a lot of shenanigans, a lot of ballots that were destroyed. The way I like to sum it up for people, it was so shady what happened in 2016 that even the Florida governor weighed in on it. He probably weighed in on it for all the wrong reasons, but he weighed in on it nonetheless. So it was a very shady campaign. Now, Tim made a very big decision recently. And Tim, I'm going to hand it over to you. Fill the viewers in.
Sure. Thank you, Ron. Well, first of all, going back to 2016, we ran a great campaign. We tapped into all of that grassroots momentum and energy, and raised a lot of money in small donations online. People were going to our website. Do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay. But people were going to our website at timcanova.com, and we built a great big field organization, knocking on 10,000 to 12,000 doors a week. And our field numbers showed a much different result than the official result. So a couple of weeks after the August primary in 2016, within a couple of weeks, I was hearing from a lot of election integrity folks who had concerns about the official results. And about a month or two later, we started to get much more serious about looking at the ballots. And we put in the first of 3 public records requests to inspect the ballots in November of 2016. And the long and short of it is, the Broward Supervisor of Elections stonewalled us for more than half a year, and I had to bring a lawsuit. While the lawsuit was pending, the Broward Supervisor of Elections destroyed all of our paper ballots in violation of federal law, which requires that they keep these ballots for 22 months. Also in violation of the court order, and she certified that the ballots were not the subject of pending litigation, and they were. So there's all kinds of wrongdoing that you alluded to already. The governor did weigh in, and so did the Florida Secretary of State. I bring it up because I don't think they're going to be done weighing in. This is a lawsuit that's ongoing. We expect to win this lawsuit, and I think when we do, there's a decent chance that the governor is going to want to replace this supervisor of elections. Now, in the course of all of this, I reached out to the local Democratic Party, the Broward Democratic Party, Miami-Dade, the Florida Democratic Party, asking them to join with me to call for an official investigation of this ballot destruction. And the silence was just deafening. And this is just ongoing with the Democratic Party here in Broward County and in Florida. They make no pretense really about being neutral. They prevent candidates like me from getting up and even speaking at party functions. They openly were supporting Wasserman Schultz in the last campaign, in the press, criticizing me, praising her. It's just one thing after another. And the fact that they can look the other way when ballots are destroyed was really the last straw. And yesterday, I made an official announcement that I am changing my party registration to non-party affiliation, and that I will be running against Wasserman Schultz, not as a Democrat in a closed Democratic primary, but as an independent on the ballot in November in the general election.
All right, so let me cut you off there, and then we're going to dive more into that. But first thing I did, which I apologize to you, Tim, I forgot to kind of give you the lowdown of what to expect here. So I'm going to do that real quick. So first of all, guys, everybody on Live Me and YouTube, Tim cannot stick around for the entire hour, so get your questions ready and fire your questions as quick as you can, because we want to make as much use as the time we got. Tim's very busy right now. So Tim, what you can expect here, this is Get Your News On with Ron. I like to refer to this as the world's first viewer-curated streaming news show. What that means, I'm monitoring two platforms, Live Me, a streaming app here on my phone, and YouTube. People are going to be firing you questions from both platforms. I'm going to be filtering them the best that I can. The folks on Live Me, they can hear you, but they can't see you. But they get the first choice of questions. People over on the YouTube, they can see you and hear you. So sometimes whenever you're going to be talking, my mic's going to be muted so that the audio doesn't bleed through, but so that the people on Live Me can still hear you. If you notice me looking around, even talking, it's not that I'm not paying attention or that I'm like totally like I saw a balloon or whatever. It's that I'm trying to filter the questions from both platforms, and that's how we do things here. It's a lot of fun. So here's the first question that somebody had for you. Why did you choose to run independent and not green enter? And I want to add to that, what kind of hurdles are you going to face now that you've decided to run as an independent? What's going to be next for you to make sure you're a viable candidate in November?
Okay, well, the Green Party is in a relatively weak position, not just throughout Florida, but in Broward County in particular, I think. It has not established itself with a strong track record. It's a a rather low membership, and while I have had a lot of close friendships with Green Party members, and I've worked with the Greens for years. As a law professor at the University of New Mexico, I met with Ralph Nader a couple of times. We had him come out and speak at our law school and to the Albuquerque community, and I introduced him. The agendas, the platforms, there's a lot of overlap. So there's a lot I love about the Green Party. But I think in this particular race and in this particular district, I don't think it would be a path to victory. I don't know if that's the case in other districts around the country. Perhaps not. But as an independent, I think this is the fastest growing part of the voting population right now. The surveys are showing that young voters in particular, Gen Xers, millennials, and even younger, 60 to 70% of them, they're not registered Democrat, they're not registered Republican, they're not registered Green. They are registered non-party affiliation, independent. So I do think that provides a very good path here. I kept saying doors closed by the Democratic Party. They hide their primary at the end of August, where there's very little air in the room, where they really try to keep the voter turnout very low, and only those super voters who come out and vote. Now, listen, we may have actually won that last race in 2016. It's very hard to know. It'll probably be impossible to know because the ballots were destroyed, but that in and of itself is very suspicious. Now we're on the ballot for November. That opens up a lot of opportunities. It gives us more time for organizing. It also allows us to reach out way beyond just sort of the establishment Democratic voter to independents and Republicans as well, and even to Democrats who don't normally vote in primaries but they will vote in a general election. I think it also frees us up with our message that we can speak much more frankly about a range of issues that would be marginalized in a closed Democratic primary. Now, the main hurdles, the main challenges we are facing are what every campaign is facing. We need to raise money. We need to raise money so that we have the resources to conduct a ground operation, field operations, campaign literature, you name it, advertising. And, you know, folks are contributing. I'll tell you, we made the announcement yesterday at 12 noon, and our page is lit up at timcanova.com. We're receiving a lot of small donations, and that's what runs our campaign. That's what fuels our campaign. I don't take a penny of any PAC money, none of the political action committees that are industry funded or corporate funded. I've sworn that I will not take a penny of that. And that's the way it was last campaign. Last campaign, we raised over $3 million, almost $4 million, and it was all on small donations. In fact, Huffington Post had a piece where they ranked all of the candidates in the 2016 race. Not my race, I'm talking about all the races nationwide, from the presidential race to Senate races to congressional races, all federal races. And their article said that we had broken all the records for the highest percentage of small donations online of any federal campaign in history. And I'm very proud of that. We're trying to duplicate that. And that's the kind of help we need from your viewers and your listeners, is to go to timcanova.com and throw a few dollars our way, and to share and let other people know that they can help us in that way.
So you've already gained ballot access. You already, is it because you've already acquired the necessary signatures? You already have the clout that you built in 2016? Is that the situation you're currently in?
No, if I was going to run as a Democrat, we'd be submitting petitions. We were in the process of gathering petitions when I called off the petition gathering drive. Instead, we're just going to pay a filing fee. We have the money for the filing fee. We will go to Tallahassee, the state capital, on May 4th, pay the filing fee, and we're going to be having rallies and meetings with progressive candidates and grassroots activists, not just in Tallahassee, but all the way back to South Florida. We're going to stop in Gainesville and Orlando, Tampa, Sarasota, and Fort Myers. And we're going to be trying to galvanize the progressive community. I mean, folks are already reaching out to us and excited for our visits.
So what's going to be the situation come debate time? Do you think, are you going to get a chance to debate Debbie Wasserman Schultz?
Well, if I stayed as a Democrat, I think she would have completely avoided debates with me. She tried to avoid them last time. We shamed her into one early Sunday morning debate that was at the timing, the scheduling of it was dictated by her and her corporate media cronies. And they wanted to do a half-an-hour debate on a Sunday morning, early Sunday morning, when nobody would be watching. Much the way she conducted herself as chair of the Democratic National Committee when she initially scheduled just a few debates between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and scheduled them to conflict with, you know, major college sports events and things like that, so nobody would, you know, there'd be a smaller viewership. So I think had I decided to run again as a Democrat, there would have been very little chance of a debate. And now running in a general election, there are going to be debate opportunities, not just with me, but also with the Republican candidate, whoever they should choose. And Wasserman Schultz will look even more foolish if she just doesn't show up to those debates.
Do you think that's going to deter her? I mean, she has no problem looking foolish whenever she speaks. You don't have to answer that.
Good question.
You have to be more diplomatic than I do, Tim.
No, I have not been very diplomatic lately, Ron. I've not been. It's maybe one of my faults.
Well, hey, man, if you're not going to be diplomatic, this is the show for it. But so people want to know, why do you think Bernie Sanders won't follow your example and go independent as well? It's a heavy question, but
you know, and I get asked questions about Bernie a lot, and you know, I've met him very briefly. I worked with him in 2011, before I was a candidate. I was a law professor. I am a law professor. And for years, I was writing about the Federal Reserve. I was writing critically about deregulating Wall Street. And I've got a written record, a publishing record, scholarship that goes back decades. And I'm one of those who was, you know, the Chicken Littles who was warning we were warning that the financial system was going to collapse because of all this deregulation, and no one was really listening to our warnings. But after the financial system did collapse in 2008, people did start paying more attention, and in 2011, I got a call from Bernie Sanders' Senate office asking me to be on an advisory committee to reform the Fed. So I had some dealings with Bernie back then in a capacity of Federal Reserve reform, and I have always had a lot of respect for him. When he announced he was running for president, I think probably the day he announced, I know it was very quickly, I contributed a small amount online like millions of others would. And he's a big part of the reason I got in the race against Wasserman Schultz last time around. You know, I'm asked a lot of questions about him, why he won't go independent, why he won't come out more forcefully against Wasserman Schultz and things like that. And your guess is as good as mine. You know, Bernie has to operate in a different world than us. He's inside the Beltway. He's got to deal with Chuck Schumer, and he's got to deal with Republicans and mainstream establishment Democrats. And I think his hands are sometimes more tied than people realize. And I don't say that in any way to be critical of him. It's just the reality that he's in. And I wish him the best. I support his agenda. I'll continue to support his agenda. And I hope when elected, I'll be working alongside of him and other progressives in Washington.
So Theo wants to know, Theo's going to be a college student in the fall. And they want to know, and especially since you're a professor too, so I'm sure you have a lot to say about this. And I'm pretty sure I already know your position, but what are your thoughts on tuition-free college? I'm
all for tuition-free college education. And, you know, Bernie's plan is to tie tuition-free public colleges and public universities to a Robin Hood tax, to raise the money to pay for that, to pay for tuition-free higher education. Through a financial transactions tax on Wall Street. And I'm all for that. I would go even further, because Bernie's plan is really limited to tuition-free for public colleges and public universities. I like to look at the GI Bill of Rights as a great blueprint. My dad was served in World War II, and like 16 million other Americans who served in World War II, when the war ended and they came back as veterans, they had the benefits of what was known as the GI Bill of Rights. And that provided any of them with a tuition-free higher education at any university in the United States or in the world, along with living stipends for the 4 years that they were students, sometimes longer than 4 years. I've met folks and I've heard of people who got graduate degrees under the GI Bill of Rights. So it was a very generous program. It created a higher education boom. It meant that that greatest generation was not saddled with debt. So what would it look like to do that today? I've been very much in favor of a national service program. Can make it a voluntary national service program. So when students turn 18, when they graduate from high school, if they will devote 2 or 3 years to serving in a national service program, they would then be eligible for tuition-free higher education at any university in the world, along with living stipends. So what kind of service programs are we talking about? I would model it right on Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, a civilian conservation corps. During the New Deal, you had, I believe it was more than 3 million young men mostly, of all races, who served in civilian conservation corps camps in the beautiful national parks and national forests. And what were they doing? They were cutting fire lines, clearing underbrush, putting out small fires before they became big fires. And you compare that with today, where we don't have a big national CCC, a Civilian Conservation Corps program. And instead, what do we have? We've got 4 million acres of national forests that are being scorched by forest fires every year now. The fire season seems to be a 12-month season in many parts of the country. And we should allow young men and women to serve the country in a useful capacity like that. I think we can have a sea conservation corps, which would help to clean up not just the oceans, the coastal waters, but the inland waterways. There's all kinds of garbage, pollution, plastics that we read about. There's lots of sea conservation that could go on. The New Deal also had a Works Projects Administration that employed millions of people building up the infrastructure. In fact, Ronald Reagan's father and brother got through the Great Depression working for the WPA. And the WPA during the 1930s, it built schools, hospitals, bridges, tunnels, airports, seaports. We need a WPA that will help rebuild the infrastructure. Things like waterworks, sewage treatment facilities. We shouldn't be turning towards privatization to solve these problems. We should invest public resources. We should put people to work in public works programs. And I'll tell you, the WPA also employed thousands and thousands of Americans who were musicians, artists, and writers working on cultural production during the Great Depression. There's lots of people in this country who are underemployed. The official unemployment rate is really a fairy tale at this point. Millions of people have dropped out of the labor market. They've become discouraged workers. They're tired of looking for work, or they've got 3 or 4 part-time jobs to make ends meet, or they're consultants to make ends meet, but they don't have a full-time job with benefits, and that's what they would like. We need the federal government. This should be the top priority in this country, a jobs for all program. You know, there's been legislation introduced in the House of Representatives year after year, session after session. My opponent, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, has never co-sponsored the Jobs for All legislation.
No, she wouldn't be able to issue as many payday loans that way. If more people were working, she wouldn't be. You know, she has no incentive to do that, and she's. I think she's maybe as crooked as they get. I mean, I don't think there's many, as even in the Democratic Party, that's saying an awful lot. You know,
it was an eye-opener for a lot of folks in 2015. I joined the anti-TPP, the Anti-Trans-Pacific Partnership movement, and was working with the Citizens Trade Campaign here in Florida. And we were trying to get elected representatives, congressmen, congresswomen, and senators to vote against fast-tracking the TPP. It turned out that Debbie Wasserman Schultz was the only Democratic House member in Florida to vote to fast-track this agreement. And we started looking at her fundraising record. Well, she had taken $330,000 from corporate interests that were for the TPP. So we started looking even further. You know, you could go to opensecrets.org. The Center for Responsive Politics compiles these statistics from the Federal Election Commission. And we started to investigate and see how much money Debbie Wasserman Schultz had been taking from corporate interests. And it was mind-blowing. Millions of dollars from the biggest Wall Street banks, payday lenders, as you mentioned. Well, those payday lenders, they all have financing that they receive from big Wall Street banks. So Wasserman Schultz doesn't want a full employment program. She doesn't want Medicare for all because she's in the pockets of big pharma, the private health insurance companies. She takes money from private prison companies, and she has supported a private immigration detention center right here in our own district in a town called Southwest Ranches. Issue after issue. She's a drug warrior. She takes money from not just big pharma, but big alcohol, big sugar, fossil fuels. So she pretends to be, you know, a liberal, a progressive, a leader of the resistance against Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, she's just a corporate stooge.
All right. Well said. I like it. All right. We're getting a lot of questions here, so we're going to kind of go quick because I know you got limited time for us. So what is one message that's really resonating specifically in Florida from your campaign? Like what's one thing that's really hitting with people?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a number of things here in Florida. First of all, like anywhere in the country, people are concerned with all the corrosive influence of money in politics, of corporate money in politics. So people look at our campaign and they see me as Mr. Clean. You know, I get criticized for, you know, oh, he's too pure, he won't take corporate money. But I'll tell you, that resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, that's a pretty lazy bald joke. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You've done before.
Exactly.
Hi there, Timo.
Oh, hold on a sec. Somebody sent me a text. I'm sorry. What's that?
Is that show business? Tell them I'm busy. Tell them I'm busy with Tim Canova. I can't take their call.
So the election integrity issue is beginning to resonate, of course. People are appalled that these ballots were destroyed. Beyond that, I'll tell you, the issues that resonate here resonate around the country. People are tired of the war on drugs. They're tired of mass incarceration. They're concerned about all of the kind of racial discord and scapegoating that goes on. People want an immigration solution here in South Florida. We're for a pathway to citizenship, and not a 20-year pathway to citizenship, but something much more humane and realistic. not just for dreamers, but for other undocumented neighbors as well. I'd like to see a comprehensive immigration reform. The environmental issues are very big here in South Florida as well. As you can imagine, we have rising sea levels. This is in many ways ground zero for the climate change crisis. And we have taken a very strong stance against fracking. Wasserman Schultz has not. Against the Sable Trail pipeline, which is Florida's equivalent of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Wasserman Schultz has not come out against that pipeline. She takes a lot of money from Florida Power and Light and its parent corporation, NextEra. We won't take a penny from any of those corporate interests. We're for a Green New Deal. We'd like to see Tulsi Gabbard's bill, that off fossil fuels, 100% renewables, happen very quickly. And you know, what I bring to the table also, again, as a law professor who has studied these issues, is how do we pay for this? You know, in Washington, the conventional wisdom among both Democrats and Republicans is that if you want to pay for something, you've got to cut something else. It's a pay-as-you-go. And first of all, the modern money theory people out there, I'm sure you've got some of them listening to you, the MMTers, they point out that there should not be any financial constraints to this kind of fiscal policy. And I think they're right, not just on a theoretical level, but also when you take a look at U.S. economic history. Beyond that, beyond deficit spending, there are things we can do where we don't have to add to the deficit. We can have the Treasury and the Federal Reserve help finance a national infrastructure bank, which becomes like a revolving fund. And as you start spending the money and putting people to work building infrastructure, you're helping restore the tax base at the same time. So with a national infrastructure bank could be very, I think it's necessary to get this country off of fossil fuels and to convert very quickly to solar, wind, tidal energy, wave energy, all of these emerging new technologies.
All right. So Balthazar, thank you very much for the contribution here. And Tim, what are your thoughts on municipal internet, 1 Gbps for all, municipal mobile data? Basically, what are your thoughts on municipal internet and what's going on with net neutrality and stuff like that?
I've always been very supportive of municipal internet and of net neutrality. I've been on many protests here in my district, along with the Communication Workers of America, protesting outside of Verizon's. Verizon is one of the villains here in trying to kill net neutrality. I think we need a free and open internet. You know, you take a look at these broadband giants, these social media giants, these resemble monopolies more than anything else at this point, or oligopolies. You know, these are huge cartels. They have so much influence on the kind of range of our speech, free assembly. And if we're going to have a thriving democracy with grassroots participation, we need an open internet. I'm teaching a seminar this semester. I'm a law professor at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale. My seminar is on law, finance, and markets. And one of my students is writing a paper, actually, and just did a presentation last week on the internet, on net neutrality. And in his presentation, he talked about the several pilot programs. I shouldn't even call them pilot programs. They're well beyond pilot programs at this point. Municipalities around the country that are moving forward for running their own internet. And I'm all supportive of that.
Yeah, I'm trying to get that happening here in my community. Actually, I've showed up at a few city halls, and the mayor has not been responsive. But I'm going to come back soon.
What town are you in?
Excuse me?
What town?
Pasadena, okay. California. Yeah. What are your thoughts on a universal basic income?
I'm all for both universal basic income and a federal jobs guarantee. I don't think the two have to be mutually exclusive at all. I think they work well if they are together. I think anyone who wants employment should be able to find a job in this country. And if the federal government can act as the lender of last resort, it can also act as the employer of last resort. During the New Deal, that's the role the federal government essentially played. And that's what we needed to play. But at the same time, those kinds of jobs have to be living wage jobs. And the best way to ensure that there will be a living wage for everyone is if the federal government provides a floor on income through a basic income guarantee.
So you're for the fight for 15?
I am for the fight for 15. You know, I'll say this. Barack Obama, when he was president, got some praise for signing an executive order that said any company that does business with the federal government has to pay a certain minimum wage. And there are a lot of companies that do business with the federal government. The federal government is spending $3 to $4 trillion a year, something like that now. That's a lot of private contracts. I think what would have been more effective is if the executive order had said any company that does business with the federal government has to have a ratio of CEO pay to their rank and file pay of 20 to 1 or 30 to 1 and no higher. Because today,
Amen. Which is comparable to most other places. Meanwhile, we're at 475 plus to 1.
Exactly.
We did an article on this show that somebody sent in. I think the worst in the country is Del Monte, the canned fruit.
I heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're at like, I think it's like 1,400 something. I forget the exact number, but it's about 1,400 approximately to 1.
And you know, we could continue to creep up the minimum wage. But if we don't take care of the problem of these outsized incomes at the top, people getting a slightly bigger minimum wage, they're not going to have an easier time. The rents will still get out of control. They won't be able to keep up with the costs of living. So, you know, we need progressive taxation. We need a lot more tax brackets over $1 million than we have. And we need to tax the hell out of that group. You know, the 98% of this country, maybe 95%, they don't need a tax hike. But that top 1-2%, I think it would be very healthy to have a big tax hike so that, you know, the rich used to use their outsized incomes, to buy vacation homes and private jets. Now they buy congressmen and senators.
So what are your thoughts on BDS? Some folks want to know your thoughts on BDS.
So
that's a light topic for you.
Well, it's an important topic. And, you know, I have lived in Israel and worked in Israel on a kibbutz. I grew up in a very Jewish neighborhood. I'm supportive of the state of Israel, the Jewish state of Israel. That doesn't mean I support the Netanyahu government. I do not. I'm not a supporter of BDS. However, let me say this, that my opponent, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, has co-sponsored legislation that would outlaw BDS. And, you know, I certainly don't favor outlawing BDS at all. I think it's important that we start having, the United States has to play a very aggressive role in a peace process in the Middle East, and it has not been doing that. It really abdicated that years ago. There was no major initiative that came out of the Obama administration. And, you know, instead you've had the continuing militarization of the entire region. You know, when the Obama administration signs a $100 billion arms sales agreement with the Saudis, and now the Trump administration has done that and more, that becomes the justification for more arms sales to other countries in that region as well. We need to be having a very aggressive peace agenda. I respect those who believe BDS is the way to go. I'm not there yet. I don't know if I ever will be, but I'd like to see the federal government, the United States government, take a leading role. And what we need are not just bilateral negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but we need to bring in all other kinds of regional players into this and have some kind of a regional peace conference and a global arms control agreement. I'm not talking about just weapons of mass destruction and nuclear weapons, but conventional arms as well. Unfortunately,
do you feel like the United States at the moment then is really going the wrong way about this? I mean, I don't know if you heard some of Chuck Schumer's recent comments at AIPAC and so forth, but it was very, I thought, very disheartening and not very pro-diplomatic as far as like a peace agenda. I'm not sure if you heard those. If you heard,
I didn't. What was he basically saying? That Israel can do no wrong?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, that was the basic. It was Israel can do no wrong. Everything we're doing is fine. There's nothing. It's you know, there's no peace because other people don't want to listen to the Torah, and it was disturbing to listen to. And it's like, okay, that's not how we're gonna find any peaceful solutions here. And, you know, I appreciate the fact that, you know, you're willing to approach it from a more kind of gray area where it's like, look, You can be pro the people that live in a place while still opposing oppressive things militaries do. I live in the United States. I like the United States. I'm opposed to a lot of the things our military does,
Well,
not the people
exactly.
there, but the decisions that the people with power make and put them into.
Well, and that's the point that I'm glad you framed it that way, because that is the way I see it. I'm an American. We're Americans. It doesn't mean that I should fall into line and support a drone war that is going on in, what, 7, 8 countries for years now, and it's expanding further. They're going to expand drone wars into Africa now. It doesn't mean I'm anti-American. It means I just don't like the policies that are being adopted by the foreign policy establishment in Washington, D.C. Likewise, I'm pro-Israel. I love Israelis. I've been there. I've lived there. I've worked there. I've got friends. I've got lots of folks who I love who are in Israel. But at the same token, I believe in the Palestinians should have self-determination and they should have a Palestinian state. I don't support a lot of the military policies of Israel. I feel like I'm free to be critical of Israeli policy. I'm also critical of the Palestinian leadership. You know, I'll say this, that a lot of people on the left in this country, they are rightfully critical of some of Israel's policies, but sometimes they let that blind themselves to where they perhaps should be calling out the Palestinian leadership at the same time. You know, when you have a Palestinian president who speaks out of both sides of the mouth and says one thing in English and another thing in Arabic, when their textbooks are preaching hatred, there's something wrong with that. And, you know, that's, I think both sides have, there's room to criticize both sides. Both sides have to see the common humanity of the Palestinian people and the Israelis. And there needs to be a very aggressive peace process. You know, for much of my early life, you know, every presidential administration, the idea of brokering a Mideast peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians was one of the top foreign policy agendas. You know, Nixon, Carter, you know, even Ronald Reagan, and of course Bill Clinton tried mightily, the Oslo Accords. But it seems like really since George W. Bush, it's been off the table. After September 11th occurred, you know, the Iranians, a regime that is very repressive, very repulsive, they sent a diplomatic note to George W. Bush through Swiss emissaries. I don't know if you've ever read about this or heard about this. An 18-page letter in which the Iranian leader, the president at the time, was seeking what he called a grand bargain, where everything would be on the negotiation table, including the status of Jerusalem. And the Bush administration never even responded. So
well, let me ask you this, like, and then we got to switch topics here because I know you got limited time, but I want to ask you this just because you said I did live in Israel. One of the things that people talk about here in the States, and something I've heard people say before is they're like, you know, you can't even bring up, you know, some of the oppressive things that goes on a lot of the time, like especially progressives and so forth. A lot of times when people bring that up, immediately you're labeled an anti-Semite without any type of actual constructive dialogue. Meanwhile, people say over in Israel, you can talk about it more freely, where they'll more freely criticize what their government is doing. And they're not for stuff like that. There's left-wing people in Israel that don't favor what the military is doing. Would you say that's true? Is that a true assessment?
Yes, that's a very true assessment. The kibbutz that I worked on in Israel was a left of center kibbutz. It was left of the Labor Party. It was Peace Now, openly very critical of the militaristic policies of a Likud government, for instance, and a settlers agenda for the West Bank. I've been for freezing settlements on the West Bank and for a two-state solution. Some people say it's too late for a two-state solution. I certainly hope that's not the case. I will say that left-wing Peace Now kibbutz really changed over the years. And I think this is the result of two intifadas. The intifadas, you know, where it was campaigns of suicide bombings of civilian buses and other civilians in Israeli cities. It resulted in an awful lot of death among Israelis. You know, as a percentage of the population, it would be like 100 911s, they say, 100 September 11ths, something like that. it has an effect on the population. The population grows weary, and people who I knew who were peace now, over the years, they've come to the view that, well, peace tomorrow, maybe peace never. They've gotten demoralized about it, and that's what we have to fight, is against that demoralization, against this idea that peace is not even possible anymore. There are major arms industries in the United States and elsewhere, and military industrial complexes in the United States and in other countries that have vested interests in a war economy, in hostilities continuing, and we need to have a very aggressive peace agenda. It's not enough just to vilify the Israelis and say they should not have a Jewish homeland, that they're colonialists and all of that. We can argue the historical record forever. This country was built on colonialism. We took a whole continent away from indigenous people. Well, we've got to start where we're at. You can't go back and, depopulate where people have lived for years now. And, it's unrealistic to say that, you can turn the clock back 50 years in Israel. But that said, we have to have real peace process and negotiations, and it has to be a top priority. It can't just be lip service. And I'm afraid that's what it was for the past too many years now, 20 years.
So Balthazar wants to know, what are your thoughts on taxing religious institutions that make upwards of $100,000 a year?
I honestly haven't thought that much about it. I'm willing to listen and learn about it. I know religious institutions get tax-exempt status, and what Donald Trump has now allowed is to basically say that religious institutions that get tax-exempt status can be more aggressive in contributing to political campaigns and conducting political speech from the pulpit. I think if they're going to do that, they shouldn't have tax-exempt status.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, but that's one of the things that people, and I'm actually for taxing the churches. I do favor it, but it's so interesting that it's like there's bills out there that they want to pretty much end the separation of church and state. Yeah. And this isn't Trump thinking of it on his own. It's the people that have his ear. Yeah. And there's, I mean, if they make right to work federal, they would pretty much kill unions as we know it. All these policies are out there, and they're just Republican policies. Trump's just an ugly face on ugly policies. And nobody's talking about it because Russia.
That is true, isn't it? Russia takes the air out of the room.
We are, Tim, we're let's see here. We still got more questions for you, but I'm going to throw it over to you because I know you have limited time here. Are you doing okay? Or?
I'm doing okay. I do want to bring up, back to Israel in a way. I remember way back in the 1990s being critical of Netanyahu. He was not the prime minister. He was the finance minister. And he was pushing an austerity agenda. And you can take a look at the crossroads this country has been at for the past 10 years, and really even earlier. This neoliberal type of agenda, this corporatist agenda, what do they want? They want austerity, strangle the public sector, and privatize public functions. And that means a society of sharp elbows with lots of unemployment, lots of underemployment. That's good for big businesses. It helps their profit rate. It helps them exploit labor. It's the opposite of the New Deal approach, where you would fund the public sector well enough that you don't have to privatize services and you don't have to have mass unemployment, and profits are kept at a reasonable level and it's not out of control. So it's not surprising that we see all of this income and wealth inequality, because we've been practicing this kind of neoliberal privatization agenda for 20 years now. And it's become a bipartisan agenda. So I mentioned it that Netanyahu was practicing it well before the United States, I think. And it's led to great inequalities of income and wealth in Israel, lots of unemployment and underemployment, and it leads to a sort of a racial ethnic scapegoating in Israel and in the United States as well. It's not healthy in the United States to have these types of huge inequalities of income and wealth and massive hidden unemployment. It leads to the scapegoating of minority communities, of immigrants, and that's what we have to fight against. When you say you're for a peace process in Israel, it can't just be, well, Israel, you give back the land to the Palestinians, and that's just the way it's got to be. You need a people's agenda for the Israeli people, the Palestinian people, the American people, The United States is not the only country in the world that needs a New Deal right now. This is a global phenomenon. People all over the world have been suffering. I've come across news clips. I was going through my old boxes of books and papers from 15 years ago where multilateral institutions of the United Nations were saying that the global economy has to produce 500 million jobs in the next few years. Well, guess what? It really hasn't. You know, there's been a crisis mainly of young men in many parts of the world who end up getting recruited to be mercenaries in these ongoing wars because there's not really a productive civilian economy in many parts of the world anymore.
So we got a lot of questions on a lot of different topics. So I'm going to kind of rapid fire them at you because we only got 12 minutes left. What are your thoughts on the decriminalization of pot? First of all, the question's about at the federal level, but I want to know specifically, what would you do about that over in Florida?
Well, at the federal level, I think marijuana should be no longer a Schedule I narcotic. In Florida, I have been very supportive of, we had a referendum for medicinal marijuana. Debbie Wasserman Schultz did not favor it. I did. It passed overwhelmingly with the support of over 70% of Florida residents or Florida voters. Beyond medicinal, as far as recreational, personal possession and use of small amounts, in Miami-Dade and Broward counties, where my district is, it has essentially been decriminalized at the discretion of the police. If a police officer stops somebody and finds a small amount of marijuana on them, they have the discretion to issue a citation, a civil citation, essentially. I think the first offense is $100, and it graduates up to something like $500, depending on which county. But I think it should be statewide. I don't think, and I said this many times in the last campaign, we should not be putting people in prison for using the same drugs that the last 3 American presidents have apparently used. This drug war has been good for private prison corporations. It's been bad for America. It's been terrible for minority communities because the drug wars are enforced in a very racially, ethnically discriminatory fashion.
What you're forgetting is that Bill never exhaled.
He never.
All right.
And they say, no, he never inhaled.
Oh, he never inhaled.
It was Jerry Brown who never exhaled.
That's right. What's your take? And I know you do not accept corporate money.
That's right.
But people want to know, what's your take overall on money in politics?
It's terrible. It's one of the root causes of our problems right now. I'd say the 2 biggest problems in our politics right now is corporate money in politics and also the lack of election integrity. It's been an eye-opener what happened to me in my campaign, that we cannot verify the votes because the paper ballots have been destroyed. They think we can verify the votes by looking at computer scanned images when we all know that those can be manipulated through software manipulation. It doesn't have to be hacked by the Russians. It could be an inside job. But there's also plenty of evidence now that they could be hackings from anybody. The New York Times just had a great magazine piece called "The Myth of the Hacker-Proof Voting Machine." So what I'd like to see is this country to do what has happened all through Western Europe. They have banned the electronic voting machines for elections. What would that look like? It would look like paper ballots counted by hand in public at the local precinct level, reported immediately on election night. Do you
favor ranked choice voting or alternative voting methods?
I would love to. Yes, I have for many years. That would be fantastic. Now, I'd have to study a little bit more. Is it difficult to have that kind of ranked choice voting with just paper ballots, or do you need the computers to really tabulate those votes?
That's a good question. I don't see why paper ballots wouldn't be efficient. I mean, they would have to. I assume they would have to kind of like tally them all and then kind of do the kind of necessary placement as far as, okay, this person got this many votes, these people had this amount of ranking, and they would need to verify it.
And that would be my only concern. And I'll admit, it wasn't a concern that I used to have 10, 20 years ago when I was for ranked choice voting. But now the evidence of computer manipulation around the country is so strong that I think the most important thing is to have paper ballots that are completely transparent and verifiable. The federal government just had a $1.5 trillion tax cut. this country should be able to afford to spend a few $billions on election day to hire ordinary Americans all over this country to count ballots on election night.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. I mean, we can't like open this entire can of worms now, or unless you're willing to stay for like another hour and a half. But to my knowledge, like there's systems that would be even easier to implement than ranked choice. Now, I am pro ranked choice. I'm for ranked choice because for whatever reason, that's been the one that's been getting the most steam as of recent. So any alternative voting method that's going to better our system, I'll get behind it. But, you know, and there's people that have done more legwork on this than I have, people in election science and other different groups and so forth. But there are some better methods that would be easier to implement than ranked choice, I believe. But that's something that I'm still learning and evolving on myself as well. So if you were elected, Joel wants to know, if you were elected, would you push for any prosecution on Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the A1 brothers?
Well, I think there should be criminal investigations. And if those investigations lead to actual criminal offenses, then of course there should be prosecutions. You know, I put out a petition. People can go to timcanova.com and see the petition we put up that deals with a different type of scandal, another election scandal. And last October, the New York City Board of Elections admitted in a civil consent decree that it had purged 200,000 citizens from the voter list in the days before the Bernie Sanders-Hillary Clinton primary. And they promised never to do it again. Well, that's all well and good, but those sound like major criminal offenses. Why is there no criminal investigation and prosecutions? You know, we don't any longer have a real rule of law for the wealthy and powerful. You know, we like to say that this is equal justice under the law and the United States is a rule of law society and others are not. But take a look. Wall Street bankers, no criminal prosecutions. All the election fraud in 2016, no criminal prosecutions. The Awan brothers scandal, we're waiting. What's happening? Are the Republicans waiting to spring this on Debbie Wasserman Schultz after her primary in August? I hope so, but I don't know.
Well, was part of your decision to run as an independent? And Balthazar asked a question similar to this, so I'm going to tie his question in with this. Is this sort of part of your approach to try to avoid potential fraud coming up in 2018?
Yes, it is. I think that this Broward supervisor of elections, who destroyed our paper ballots in violation of federal law, she basically signed a certification on the destruction order saying that the ballots were not the subject of litigation. They were. That sounds like perjury, for God's sakes. The prospect that that supervisor of elections could be administering a closed primary at the end of August with her friend Debbie Wasserman Schultz on the ballot again, that's intolerable. I'd rather wait until November, give the governor another couple of months maybe to replace this supervisor of elections. I've been calling for an investigation for many, many weeks, and the political establishment doesn't seem to want to hear any of it. So yes, it gives us more time to prepare for the election and to protect the vote, and that's going to be one of our top priorities, to make sure that this is not a stolen election. I felt a very big obligation to all those thousands of people who donated their money, their time to our campaign last time to make sure that we could verify the vote, and then they destroy the ballots. So I want people to know, if they go to timcanova.com and make a contribution, that we're going to be using their money to help audit the vote and to protect the vote.
All right, Tim, we are pretty much out of time. Thank you so much for fielding these viewer-submitted questions.
Very welcome. It's always great to see you.
It's not the easiest show to do. I let people know that ahead of time. Usually Pasta gives people a kind of thing on what to expect. We put this together last minute, so you didn't really get that. But, you know, I appreciate you, stepping up to the plate and not kind of softballing anything. I really do appreciate that.
Wonderful to visit with you, Ron. I look forward to next time, and hopefully I'll get to see Pasta next time too.
Absolutely. And please use this time. Please remind people, where can they find out more about you? Where can they learn more? Where can they help? Thank you.
You know, 2 years ago, a lot of folks looked at our race against Wasserman Schultz as like the epicenter of the political revolution. Especially after Bernie Sanders had been eliminated in the presidential race, people were looking at our race as really the revolution was running through South Florida. I think it still is. I think this is a crucial race. Running as an independent should shake up the system. I hope that folks will come online to timcanova.com, throw us a few dollars, whatever you can afford, and to spread the word to other people. We're going to have phone banking opportunities online. People, please come to our district and campaign for us in person. Pasta did last time. We had so many people from outside the state that we had to rent 2 different houses, group houses, for our out-of-state field organizers to come here and knock on doors. And at the height of the campaign, we had 4 field offices, 50 full-time field organizers and deputy field organizers, and hundreds of volunteers. It's that kind of a grassroots campaign that's what this campaign is about. A grassroots effort, knocking door to door, engaging voters at their doorsteps, in their living rooms, hearing what their problems are, what their issues are, and spreading the word about our political revolution. You know, I think I fell out of favor with the political consulting class in the last race. Why? Because I refused to follow their rules, which is to spend 70% of what you raise on political consultants. We did the complete opposite. That's the kind of campaign we're running. That's the kind of campaign.
It's all part of the corruption. They basically make you give money to their friends.
That's right.
I mean, the DCCC, it's a scam.
Exactly. And that's what the Democratic Party has become here in Florida and in many parts of the country, maybe the entire country.
Everywhere. Let's not sugarcoat. Everywhere.
Yeah, it is a conduit between corporate lobbyist money and the consulting media complex that gets paid that money. That's the role of the Democratic Party today. And enough is enough. You know, we've got to change things. This is one of the key races in 2018. I know a lot of folks will overlook it, but, you know, there is a real choice in this district, in this race, between a corporate-dominated Democrat, a corporate-dominated Republican, and then our campaign, which is a people's campaign, a grassroots campaign.
And just a reminder to everybody out there, Tim is running as an independent. He decided that the Democratic Party, enough was enough. As he said, he's running as an independent to try to pick off Debbie Wasserman Schultz in Florida's 23rd district. Go to timcanova.com to learn more about him. Guys, we are totally out of time. Thank you so much for your questions. You guys knocked it out of the park as usual. This has been Get Your News On with Ron, the world's first viewer-curated streaming news show. Follow me on Twitter at Ron Placone. That's where you can send me articles. RonPlacone.com. Tour dates are coming in daily. And if you are so able to help support this show and keep it on the air, Patreon.com/Ron Placone. You get a ton of perks, a ton of content at a pay-what-you-can level. And again, to learn more about Tim, timcanova.com. Tim, best of luck to you. I'm rooting for you. And thanks for making some time for me.
Thank you. Thank you for making time for me. Take care.